So right off the bat, as a synopsis to like the three main things I wanted in your dancing in this, one, I wanted more connections, meaning like pitches. Like, are you in compression or are you in resistance, right? Whatever version about that is.
There has to be a V or an A. We can't be just moving head over toes.
The first pattern we did today of that was this toss sugar push. Well, we are here. You see how close we are, like about 6 inches apart, like really looking at each other. You don't have to look at the audience, but it's very intentional outward. Now we're gonna walk, however many of those there are. You'll see that she has this angle where she's like hips slightly that way, head over here this way.
Hip counter.
A little bit of head weight, hip weight counter. What's good about this closeness is now I can flip the hand and be closer to her, now going away. And you'll see in this part, she's stepping forward, but she's still back. Then from here, we'll do this reverse whip to whatever we happen here. I'm not exactly sure what happens there. Next thing is...
Well, in the reverse whip, we worked on the development of the four.
Yeah. No, that's good. As a side tangent, we talked a little bit about developing your ones and the first step of your redirections better, right? So right off the bat, we started off with pointing your leg to the side so that you understood how to bevel your leg. Eventually, you can actually just have your leg underneath you and create that beveling action without ever needing to actually drag the leg in. That's just like a way of getting your leg in the right position.
Specific count-wise, when I bevel my leg in, that's and, I get to my full point on and then I develop my foot over on one. But a lot of the times I will stretch it even longer to do a delayed one, which means that I'm developing my leg all the way through one and then stepping two. So you see, in that case, I've taken more time in the development.
You'll see a lot of higher level dancers like not make
fine.
the full weight change on one. It'll happen after the one, right? So it'll look like 1, 2, instead of it just being right on the beat. 1, 2. Sometimes it makes for a more like rushed, like on the top beat, and we like to slur that like a vocalist sings over the odd numbers. So dancers also like to kind of hover over the odd numbers instead of like be right on it.
And we want that in every first step of the redirection.
So in the ones that we talked about today was on your whips. We started off with basic whips here, but it goes and up, 1, 2, 3, and up, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. Now, something that I talked about in that workshop is when we go into this whip, and specifically for Vadim, we do a diagonal 1. I bring my 2 to me, so she doesn't come to me. I'm sorry, I don't go to my 2. My 2 comes to me. So it goes like 1, 2. Do you see how like my head positioning is here? I don't go 1, 2. So don't shift your weight forward immediately on 2. Actually keep it back. 1, 2. See, my body position is actually still upright, right? And now as the 3-and happens, I'm gonna go diagonally back rocking, replacing, and pointing my foot across the slot here, which will make her also point that foot. From here, I'm gonna make a weight change. This is technically and 5, 6, 7, and 8, right? So technically, like that's the rhythm structure, but so that you don't look like 4 and 5, it looks like one motion. 4, 5, 6, it just feels like a long 4. So it goes 1, 2, 3, and 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8.
Now for Karen, also keep in mind we have to make sure that our 3 is a little bit smaller so that we don't do a coaster step. A coaster step is when we go back together forward.
And you have that like forward pitch that happens.
The whole thing has a forward intention to it. We want to go back, and then forward. 1, 2, back, and then he is required to pull me forward. We did that by practicing a half whip or right side pass, where it looks like it's going to be a whip, but then he just gives me all that space to fill. That's what I want to think every whip is, so that then I can get that back feeling.
When I'm social dancing with my students and they're sucking at their whips doing that, I lead that pattern over and over again so they stop assuming that it's a whip. Just so that it'll help you constantly just be like, here it comes, just going back. Right? I do that all the time just to make them like get the feeling of that it's never going to be forward, so that now I can take you forward. It'll give you that intention backwards and give you more space.
The flips.
The flips, we talked about the whip here more particularly for him. When I catch the whip from this angle, I step 1. I step 2 and actually start catching her in front of me. You'll see that my palm is actually in this position, right? As I step into count 2. And then from here, I'm sorry, let me back up again. Then from here, I'm gonna go 3 and you'll see my hand like start to from this wrist flared to the other side rounding as I go through, and I'm resisting that, right? Before, what he was doing is actually catching it already rounded.
Yep, and behind you almost.
And because of that, you only could like stretch from that instead of absorb it from here through, and that'll help a lot more of like absorbing the front side of it. 1, 2. You see that hand that we talked about here? That I'm slightly shaping it here. Look, it goes a little bit across the track. And then here, careful with not like really rounding that. I actually bring it more down and a little bit to the left. So we don't have slack. It's easy to make it look like this. Right? So you have to make that like swirl but soft, right? It feels like big swirl, soft swirl, right? Okay. Then the wrapping. And overall, this is another thing in your performance as a general concept, adding more contrast to your movements. And that is like, sometimes you unveil stylings, but there's no change, no speed change to go like, look at this new cool shit I'm doing. Because everything is all the same speed, it almost looks like you're just showing me like like a magician's trick, like ahead of time. Like I'm like, oh cool, like that was nice. You have to like reserve it and go boom. There's a lot of times in the routine where this needs to happen. One of them that we didn't go over was the wrap in that you have later, this one. You need to be like, you see that quick slow right there? And right now it's like,
it's super slow.
Right? It needs to be like, audience, right? And then this is one of them as well, which we did the wrap in, wrap out.
This one, because I'm going for more of a level change action, I don't load my forward too much. This just feels kind of basic, but as I go through, I ball change quickly. I gotta get that right foot behind so I have a base to go to. I'm dropping down just a little bit so I have somewhere to take my body to. We talked about this arm is gonna stop at the 12 o'clock, and from here I'm gonna sink into my hip just a little bit. You can soften that knee if you want to, but I'm not shaping because we need to be able to go right into the next reverse whip.
We
did the 2 hands up, that's
two
right.
hands up. 1, 2, and we did like the head loop, I think.
And boom.
Both hands up, head loop in this transition. You'll see how when she goes through 4, 4 is not at its destination on 4, it has like an arc, so it goes 4 and up, 4 and up, 5. What's good about that is that if you do it from 4, you're at the farthest extension, so try to head loop me.
I'm gonna miss.
Right?
I'm gonna
So
what
what happens is that she hits the top on 4, and then as she's transitioning, that space closes, right? Which is perfect. And honestly, worst case scenario, just don't like, why? Well, what's wrong for you to like kind of drop it here and let the hands drop? Like it's totally okay. If that happens and you're like, okay, I need to drop it a little bit, like that still looks cool. So don't be afraid of that as like a negative. Don't think like it went wrong all of a sudden because you can't reach them. Just separate those, have intention with your fingers, and it's gonna look great.
That was it?
I think that was it. So that was the speed changes, the connections by having like that forward or back. I said something about spotting. Like I want you guys to have the full layer of spotting. Just overall, it doesn't have to be always out, but there has to be some more intentional, like even faces. Like I hate to say it, but choreograph a certain way every time. Like for example, here's an easy way. When you are walking for this, why don't you say A every time you walk, right? So it goes like A, right? So it makes you every time you do it. It can be oohs, it can be ha's, it can be ha, ooh, right? It can be any of that, but I would even have you choreograph that. It's caca to think that you will just all of a sudden perform better.
Some people
I
do.
hear you.
but
No,
If you don't
I
do
do
that,
not.
I can't stand it with students. Sometimes we're like, oh, I'll do it better in competition. I'll do it better. No, you won't. You have to be able to do it every time. Now, when I ask you, when nobody's watching, when everybody's watching, you got to do the same face every time, because then when you're nervous, you'll default to your training, which is really good. You can't just be like, oh, I feel good, now I'm gonna do a good face. So I would say go through the routine, have very particular faces, and sometimes the vowels or the words sometimes, A's, E's, helps you not just be like smiling, right? Not to be like, you know, to the thing, right? So you have to, that's why the letters really help with that, ooh, ah, sa. And there's different versions of that. Sometimes you can say small words, ta, pa, boom, yeah. Sometimes we'll go like boom, yeah, right? Just like saying that just will make your face do different things. When you go through one of these rainbows that you hit, say boom, ha, boom, ha, right? Just having that.
And it synchronizes your breath.
Yeah, together. Sometimes we'll do that together. We're like practicing breath together by doing that, like verbally saying it, so we can really know like how we're hitting it together.
This might be a silly question, but you say it, or do you just pretend to say it?
When you first do it, you say
just
it.
say it.
Okay.
You say it for a while until you don't have to say it, until you're just like, right? But do you hear my breath?
Yes.
Like,
Yeah.
can you
You'll
still
always
hear
hear
my
your
breath?
breath.
Yes. I may not be actually going like ha, pa, but my breath will go ha, sa, So it's like exhaling, but not necessarily like verbal audible.
Yeah.
Can you also describe the 3
Yes.
points that can change it?
That's great. Yes. So now, if you want to stop this and restart.